When we talk about avoiding hypocrisy in our daily lives, the very first step, the foundation upon which everything else must be built, is understanding what hypocrisy really is. It's a word we hear often, sometimes used loosely to describe people we feel are insincere or inconsistent, but its true meaning goes much deeper than mere surface-level judgment. Hypocrisy, in essence, is a disconnect between what we claim to believe and how we actually live. It is when our words, our principles, or even our outward expressions of piety and morality fail to align with the choices we make in the private corners of our lives. And the reason this is so crucial to grasp is because we can't hope to avoid something unless we first see it clearly for what it truly is. Now, many of us, when confronted with the concept of hypocrisy, immediately think of others people who preach one thing yet act in an entirely different way. We see politicians, public figures, or even friends and family members whose actions betray their words, and we are quick to label them hypocrites. But the reality is, hypocrisy is far more common than we usually admit, and it begins with ourselves. The human heart is complex, and our intentions often fluctuate. We might sincerely believe in honesty, for example, but then tell a small lie to avoid embarrassment or to gain advantage. We might value compassion, yet dismiss someone who is inconvenient or difficult. It is in these subtle moments of inconsistency that hypocrisy quietly takes root, often without us even noticing. Understanding hypocrisy, therefore, is not about pointing fingers at others. It is about looking inward with courage and honesty. It is about asking ourselves difficult questions. Do my actions consistently reflect the values I claim to hold? Are there areas of my life where I compromise on principle for comfort, convenience, or social approval? This is not meant to lead us into despair or paralysis. On the contrary, recognizing hypocrisy is an opportunity for growth, a chance to realign our inner selves with the ideals we aspire to uphold. But it requires brutal honesty with oneself, a willingness to see beyond excuses and rationalizations and confront the small and large inconsistencies that exist in all of us. It is also important to recognize that hypocrisy is rarely all, or nothing. We are not either entirely hypocritical or entirely pure. Rather, it exists on a spectrum. There are degrees of inconsistency, some of which are unconscious and some of which are more deliberate. And the key difference lies in awareness and effort. When we notice an inconsistency and take steps to correct it, that is the beginning of genuine integrity. But when we ignore it, justify it, or even conceal it from ourselves, that is when hypocrisy strengthens its grip. This is why self-reflection is so vital. By pausing to examine our motives, our choices, and our habitual behaviors, we illuminate the shadowy areas of our character where hypocrisy can hide. Another crucial aspect of understanding hypocrisy is appreciating the subtle ways it can infiltrate our daily lives. It is not always the grand, dramatic acts of deception that define it, but often the quiet compromises that we allow to become patterns. Perhaps we speak about patience and kindness, but lose our temper in traffic. Perhaps we advocate for fairness and justice, but turn a blind eye when it inconveniences us personally. Perhaps we preach honesty, but bend the truth in small ways when we think no one is watching. Each of these seemingly minor moments accumulates, shaping a character that says one thing and does another. And while it may seem insignificant at the moment, over time, it erodes trust, credibility, and even our own self-respect. As we move toward avoiding hypocrisy in our lives, it is essential to internalize this understanding deeply. It is not enough to recognize hypocrisy externally or intellectually. It must be felt, experienced, and owned in our hearts. The awareness of hypocrisy is like a mirror held up to the soul. When we look into it, we must do so without flinching or averting our gaze, because only then can we begin the process of realignment. By truly seeing where our words and actions diverge, we create the possibility for transformation not through shame alone, but through intentional effort to live more authentically and consciously, in accordance with our values. Ultimately, understanding hypocrisy is the first step toward integrity. It allows us to distinguish between outward appearances and inner realities, between claims and actualities. It reminds us that our spiritual and moral growth depends not merely on what we say, but on what we consistently do, and it prepares us to embark on the work of self-reflection, accountability, and practical change in all areas of our lives. If we cannot begin here, with this honest examination of ourselves, then every attempt to avoid hypocrisy in our interactions with others will be superficial at best. And so, if we commit ourselves to this clarity, this awareness, we begin to build a life where our words and actions resonate together, where our principles are not just slogans but living guides for our daily choices. This is where true authenticity begins, and from here, everything else, consistency, humility, accountability, can take root and flourish. Once we begin to understand what hypocrisy is and see it clearly within ourselves, the next step is self-reflection and awareness. This is a stage that requires both courage and honesty, because it calls us to look inward without excuses, without denial, and without trying to hide from the uncomfortable truths about who we are. Many of us spend so much time observing others, pointing out inconsistencies in their behavior, that we forget to turn the lens on ourselves. Yet, it is only through this inward gaze that we can truly begin to live authentically, to align our actions with our principles, and to move toward a life free from hypocrisy. Self-reflection is not just a casual thought or a fleeting feeling of guilt. It is a deliberate, intentional practice of examining our motives, our decisions, and our patterns of behavior. It is asking ourselves the questions we often avoid. Why did I react the way I did? Am I being consistent in the values I claim to uphold? Where have I compromised and why? And most importantly, are the things I say and the things I do walking in the same direction, or are they at odds? These are not easy questions, and the answers often require humility, because they demand that we admit our flaws and confront the ways we may have misled ourselves or others. Awareness, then, is the companion to reflection. Self-awareness is the ability to see ourselves as we truly are, not as we wish to be seen by others. It is the recognition of our strengths and weaknesses, our virtues and our shortcomings. Without awareness, reflection remains incomplete, because we can reflect endlessly but remain blind to the very patterns that need change. For instance, we might reflect on a situation where we failed to act with kindness, yet without awareness, we might not notice that this failure is part of a recurring pattern rooted in impatience, pride, or self-interest. Awareness allows us to identify these patterns, to trace them back to their origins, and to make conscious decisions to correct them. It is also important to remember that self-reflection and awareness are not exercises in self-condemnation. They are tools for growth, opportunities to refine our character, and to bridge the gap between our ideals and our actions. When we approach ourselves with compassion while maintaining honesty, we create a fertile ground for meaningful change. It is not about beating ourselves up for every mistake or imperfection. It is about recognizing where we fall short and committing to rise above those shortcomings. This is a critical distinction because without self-compassion, reflection can become paralyzing, leading to guilt that stagnates rather than transforms. Part of self-reflection involves examining our relationships and interactions with others. We must ask ourselves, How do I treat people in private versus public? Am I consistent in my behavior when there is no audience? Do I extend the same respect, patience, and understanding to those I know personally as I do to strangers or those I wish to impress? These questions are uncomfortable, yet they are essential, because hypocrisy often hides in these subtle inconsistencies. We might speak of generosity, yet withhold kindness from those who cannot repay us. We might advocate for fairness, yet make excuses when rules inconvenience us. Awareness allows us to see these contradictions and take responsibility for them. Moreover, self-reflection encourages us to confront the role of intention in our actions. Often, we deceive ourselves by convincing ourselves that our outward behavior is sufficient, even when our inner intentions are misaligned. But integrity demands that our intentions, too, are examined and purified. It is not enough to act rightly by habit or by fear of judgment. Our actions must stem from a heart and mind committed to authenticity and truth. This is why reflection is so vital. It uncovers the motives behind our choices and reveals whether we are truly acting in accordance with our values or merely performing them for appearances. The practice of self-reflection and awareness also strengthens our ability to make proactive, conscious choices. When we pause to reflect, we are less likely to react impulsively, to speak carelessly, or to compromise our principles under pressure. Instead, we develop a habit of mindfulness, a sense of intentionality in every action. This habit becomes a shield against hypocrisy because it allows us to live with consistency and sincerity, even in situations where it might be easier to give in to convenience, pride, or social expectation. It is through this daily, conscious effort that we cultivate a character aligned with our highest ideals. Ultimately, self-reflection and awareness are not one-time exercises but lifelong commitments. The human heart is constantly evolving, and we are continually presented with new challenges, temptations, and opportunities for growth. By dedicating ourselves to regular reflection, we remain vigilant against hypocrisy, attentive to the alignment of our words and actions, and committed to living with integrity in every aspect of life. If we embrace this practice sincerely, we begin to see ourselves more clearly, understand our motivations, and act with deliberate intention, bridging the gap between who we are and who we aspire to be. Once we have reflected on ourselves and become aware of the areas where our words and actions might not align, the next step is understanding the importance of consistency between what we say and what we do. This is a point that cannot be overstated, because hypocrisy thrives precisely in the gaps between speech and behavior. It is easy to talk about principles, to articulate ideals, or to preach values, but it is far more challenging to live them consistently in every situation. And yet, living consistently is not merely a matter of outward discipline. It is a reflection of sincerity, integrity, and the depth of our character. Consistency between words and actions begins with intention. If we claim to value honesty, then honesty must guide both our public statements and our private choices. If we claim to value compassion, then that compassion must extend not only to those we like or those who serve our purposes, but to every individual we encounter, even those who challenge us or inconvenience us. The true measure of our integrity is not how we behave when it is convenient or when others are watching, but how we behave in moments of difficulty, when acting rightly may be uncomfortable, unpopular, or even costly. Many people deceive themselves into thinking that occasional inconsistency is inevitable or inconsequential. They may tell themselves it's just a small lie, or it's not a big deal if I act this way just this once. But these small moments accumulate, and what starts as a minor inconsistency can slowly erode credibility, trust, and self-respect. A person who consistently fails to match words with actions becomes untrustworthy in the eyes of others, and even more importantly, untrustworthy in their own eyes. There is a subtle but profound damage that occurs when we act in contradiction to our professed values, because it weakens the connection between our intentions and our behavior, leaving a gap in our character that can grow if left unexamined. Consistency is also a source of inner peace and confidence. When our actions reflect our words, we no longer live in tension or fear of being exposed. There is a quiet strength that comes from knowing that what we say is what we do, that our principles are not just abstract ideas, but living realities guiding every decision we make. This inner alignment allows us to interact with others from a place of authenticity rather than pretense, fostering trust, respect, and genuine relationships. People instinctively sense when someone is consistent, and they are drawn to that integrity because it reflects reliability and truth. To cultivate this consistency, it is important to examine our daily habits and choices. We must ask ourselves, do I practice the values I speak of in ordinary, mundane moments? Am I honest when no one is watching? Am I patient, forgiving, and just when there is no reward for doing so? These questions require vigilance, because hypocrisy often hides in the ordinary, overlooked moments of life. It is easy to be principled in grand gestures, but the true test of consistency lies in our small, everyday decisions. The way we speak to colleagues, the way we handle minor inconveniences, the way we treat strangers. These moments, repeated over time, reveal the authenticity of our character. Another critical aspect of consistency is humility. Living consistently does not mean being perfect, but it does mean striving to align our actions with our words and owning our mistakes when we fail. When we act inconsistently, we must be willing to acknowledge it, learn from it, and correct it. Pretending that we are flawless or hiding our contradictions only deepens the hypocrisy we are trying to avoid. The path of integrity is one of constant self-correction, where we recognize our lapses without excuse and use them as opportunities for growth. Consistency also extends to the alignment between public and private life. In an age where appearances are often curated for social approval, it is tempting to project one image to the world while acting differently in private. But this division between public persona and private behavior is precisely the breeding ground for hypocrisy. Authenticity demands that we strive for harmony between these spheres, that our values are not selective or performative, but comprehensive and lived. It is not easy because life presents challenges, temptations, and pressures, but it is necessary if we wish to avoid the subtle erosion of character that comes from divided selves. Living consistently requires reflection, awareness, and intentionality. We must remind ourselves daily of the principles we aspire to uphold and monitor our actions to ensure alignment. This is not a rigid or legalistic approach, but a mindful and conscious effort to act with integrity, to bridge the gap between speech and action, and to live authentically in every sphere of life. By doing so, we demonstrate not only our personal integrity, but also offer a model of sincerity and accountability for others, inspiring trust and respect through our example. Ultimately, the importance of aligning words with actions cannot be overstated. Without consistency, our values remain abstract ideas. With consistency, they become living truths that guide our choices, shape our relationships, and define our character. It is through this alignment that we protect ourselves from hypocrisy, cultivate genuine respect from others, and live in harmony with our own conscience. When our words and actions walk together, we do not merely avoid hypocrisy. We embody integrity, authenticity, and moral courage in every facet of our lives. Once we have established a pattern of self-reflection, awareness, and consistency between our words and actions, the next critical step in avoiding hypocrisy is learning to avoid judgment of others. This is a principle that is often overlooked, yet it is profoundly important because hypocrisy is not only about the disconnect between what we say and what we do, it is also about how we perceive and treat others. When we focus excessively on the faults, mistakes, or shortcomings of those around us, we create a fertile ground for hypocrisy to take root within our own hearts. We criticize, we judge, we evaluate, often harshly, without recognizing that every human being is on a journey, flawed and learning in their own way. Judging others is a trap, because it allows us to feel morally superior without actually examining ourselves. We can point out the errors, inconsistencies, or perceived failings of someone else, and, in doing so, convince ourselves that we are more principled, more honest, or more virtuous. Yet this external focus can blind us to the inconsistencies within our own hearts. True growth requires that we turn our attention inward first, ensuring that our own words and actions are aligned, and that our own principles are sincere, before we offer judgment or critique of others. Otherwise, we risk speaking from a place of arrogance rather than wisdom, and we risk condemning behaviors in others that we may silently tolerate, excuse, or even practice ourselves. Avoiding judgment does not mean ignoring wrongdoing or denying truth. It is not a call to passivity in the face of injustice or immorality. Rather, it is an encouragement to approach others with humility, understanding, and compassion. It is recognizing that we all share the human experience of struggle, weakness, and temptation. When we interact with others from this perspective, we cultivate empathy instead of contempt. We become more aware of the complexity of human behavior and less likely to fall into the trap of hypocrisy by condemning actions that we ourselves are capable of committing. One of the most subtle ways that judgment leads to hypocrisy is when it fosters a double standard. We may hold others to a strict code of behavior while granting ourselves exceptions, rationalizations, or justifications for similar actions. For example, we may criticize someone for losing their temper or speaking harshly, yet we allow ourselves the same behavior when it seems justified in our eyes. This double standard is a hallmark of hypocrisy, because it reveals a gap between the moral or ethical standards we impose externally and the standards we apply internally. By consciously avoiding judgment, we reduce the likelihood of creating this dangerous gap in our own character. Another aspect of avoiding judgment is learning to see beyond appearances. It is easy to make snap assessments based on superficial impressions, someone's words, their actions, their social status, or their public persona. But people's lives are rarely as simple as they seem. We often lack full context for the choices others make, and our judgments are shaped by limited information, biases, or assumptions. By practicing restraint in judgment, we cultivate patience, curiosity, and a deeper understanding of human complexity. We give others the space to grow, learn, and correct their own mistakes, and in doing so, we guard against the self-righteousness that feeds hypocrisy. Avoiding judgment also strengthens our own moral and spiritual resilience. When we focus less on critiquing others and more on examining our own hearts, we develop humility, a recognition that we too are imperfect and in need of guidance, growth, and forgiveness. Humility is a powerful antidote to hypocrisy because it keeps us grounded, honest, and aware of the ongoing work required to align our beliefs and actions. It prevents the pride that often masks inconsistency, allowing us to face our own shortcomings with courage rather than defensiveness. Practical steps can help cultivate this mindset in daily life. One is mindfulness in interactions. Before passing judgment, pause to consider the full context, reflect on your own imperfections, and remind yourself that every person is navigating challenges you may not fully see. Another is practicing empathy, seeking to understand the experiences, struggles, and intentions of others before forming opinions. And another is focusing on personal accountability, shifting the energy that might go into criticizing others toward improving one's own behavior, choices, and character. By doing this, we create a life guided by sincerity rather than pretense, and we ensure that our moral standards are consistently applied to ourselves as much as to others. Ultimately, avoiding judgment is about aligning our inner life with our outer life. It is about creating a heart that is honest, compassionate, and aware, rather than critical, self-righteous, or divided. By turning our focus inward, practicing humility, and exercising empathy, we not only protect ourselves from hypocrisy, but also cultivate a life of authenticity and integrity. This approach transforms how we relate to the world. Our interactions become more sincere, our relationships more trusting, and our influence more positive. When we avoid judgment, we free ourselves from the burden of comparing, criticizing, and condemning, and instead channel our energy toward living in alignment with our values and guiding others through example rather than condemnation. As we continue exploring the path toward avoiding hypocrisy in our daily lives, the next essential step is embracing accountability and responsibility. This is a principle that is intimately connected with self-reflection, awareness, and consistency, because no matter how aware we become or how diligently we try to align our words and actions, we will inevitably make mistakes. We are human, and the human heart is complex, prone to lapses, misjudgments, and errors. The key difference, however, lies in how we respond to these mistakes. Do we own them fully, acknowledging both to ourselves and to those affected? Or do we hide them, rationalize them, or deflect blame? The choices we make in these moments define whether we move closer to integrity or slip further into hypocrisy. Accountability begins with an honest recognition of our own shortcomings. It requires us to admit when we are wrong, not just in private reflection, but in action as well. There is a certain humility in this admission, a willingness to confront our flaws without pretense or denial. This is not an easy task. Our egos resist it. Pride tempts us to justify our behavior or to minimize the impact of our mistakes. Yet integrity demands that we face the truth regardless of discomfort. When we are willing to say, "I was wrong," or "I could have done better," we are actively bridging the gap between our ideals and our reality. We are taking responsibility for our character, and in doing so, we protect ourselves from the corrosive influence of hypocrisy. Responsibility also extends beyond mere acknowledgement. It demands action. Owning our mistakes is not simply about verbal admission or private reflection. It is about taking tangible steps to correct them and to prevent repetition. If we hurt someone with our words, we must seek to repair that harm. If we failed to fulfill a promise, we must work to make amends and restore trust. Responsibility requires us to recognize that our actions have consequences, and that our integrity is measured not by the mistakes we make, but by the manner in which we respond to them. It is in this response that character is revealed. One of the challenges we face in embracing accountability is fear of judgment, fear of loss, fear of appearing weak. It is tempting to conceal mistakes, to excuse our behavior, or to place the blame elsewhere. But this avoidance is precisely what fosters hypocrisy. When we refuse to acknowledge our faults, we create a disconnect between the reality of our actions and the image we present to the world. Over time, this disconnect can grow, eroding trust in our relationships and corroding our own sense of moral integrity. By confronting our errors directly, we not only preserve our credibility, but also cultivate the moral courage to act in alignment with our principles, even when it is uncomfortable or costly. Accountability also requires a degree of self-discipline. It means consistently monitoring our intentions and actions, checking ourselves before we fall into patterns of behavior that contradict our values. It is easy to act rightly in the moment when we feel observed or evaluated, but integrity is tested in moments of solitude and temptation, when no one is watching. Responsibility calls us to live ethically and sincerely in all circumstances, not selectively. By cultivating habits of accountability, we build a life where our principles are consistently applied, regardless of convenience, circumstance, or external pressure. Another essential component of accountability is transparency with those around us. This does not mean exposing every private thought or minor error to the world, but it does involve honesty in our interactions and relationships. By openly acknowledging our limitations, mistakes, and areas of growth, we create an environment of trust and authenticity. Others can rely on our words because they know that we strive to align them with our actions. Transparency, therefore, reinforces consistency and strengthens the bonds of integrity that protect us from hypocrisy. Equally important is the willingness to seek feedback and correction. True accountability requires humility, and humility often means allowing others to point out areas where we fall short. When we receive constructive criticism with an open heart, without defensiveness, we gain insight into blind spots we may not have recognized. This external perspective complements our internal reflection and awareness, creating a holistic approach to self-improvement and integrity. Avoiding feedback, on the other hand, can blind us to inconsistencies and reinforce patterns of hypocrisy without our awareness. Ultimately, accountability and responsibility are not burdens, they are opportunities. They allow us to grow, to strengthen our character, and to align our lives more closely with our values. They protect us from the subtle erosion of integrity that occurs when we excuse, deny, or conceal our mistakes. They cultivate courage, honesty, and authenticity, qualities that radiate outward into every interaction, relationship, and decision. By embracing accountability fully, we demonstrate to ourselves and to the world that our values are more than words. They are guiding principles that shape our lives. By accepting responsibility for our actions and their consequences, we build a foundation of trust, authenticity, and moral courage that shields us from hypocrisy and allows us to live with integrity. A life of accountability is not easy, but it is necessary for true sincerity and consistency. After exploring self-reflection, awareness, consistency, avoiding judgment, and embracing accountability, the final key to avoiding hypocrisy in daily life lies in practical strategies that guide us in living with integrity every day. It is one thing to understand hypocrisy, to recognize its dangers, and to commit to sincerity in principle, but it is quite another to translate that understanding into action in the ordinary rhythm of life. Integrity is not a theoretical concept. It is a practice, a series of deliberate choices and habits that reinforce the alignment between our beliefs, our words, and our actions. Without practical steps, even the most sincere intentions can falter when faced with real world pressures and distractions. The first strategy is mindfulness in daily interactions. Mindfulness is not simply a technique for relaxation. It is a way of living consciously, paying attention to the impact of our words, our tone, our gestures, and even our thoughts. When we approach every conversation, every task, every decision with awareness, we create a buffer against automatic reactions that may contradict our values. This awareness allows us to pause before speaking harshly, acting selfishly, or compromising on principle. By consistently practicing mindfulness, we strengthen the connection between intention and behavior, making it more likely that our actions reflect our ideals. Another practical strategy is to set clear personal standards and boundaries. Knowing what we stand for and what we will not tolerate in our own behavior is essential for maintaining integrity. These standards act as internal guidelines, helping us navigate challenging situations where the temptation to compromise might arise. For example, if honesty is a core value, we establish a clear line that we will not cross, even if lying seems convenient or socially advantageous. If kindness is a principle we hold dear, we commit to showing it even when it is inconvenient or goes unappreciated. Setting boundaries is not rigid legalism. It is a conscious commitment to live according to values that are meaningful and consistent. Journaling or self-check-ins can also be a powerful tool for practical integrity. Taking a few minutes each day to reflect on our actions, decisions, and interactions allows us to notice patterns, recognize inconsistencies, and reinforce the behaviors that align with our principles. This is not meant to become obsessive or self-critical, but rather to cultivate awareness and intentionality. By keeping a record of our daily choices, we create a feedback loop that strengthens our ability to live authentically, reminding us that every small action matters in building a consistent character. Accountability partners are another effective strategy. Having someone whom we trust to speak honestly with us, to point out areas of inconsistency, and to encourage integrity can be immensely valuable. We often blind ourselves to certain habits or behaviors, and an external perspective can illuminate what we might otherwise miss. This does not mean seeking approval or external validation, but rather creating a support system that reinforces our commitment to authenticity. A trusted friend, mentor, or colleague can act as a mirror, reflecting back to us both our successes and the areas that need attention, helping us stay grounded and sincere. Developing routines that reinforce ethical behavior is equally important. Habits shape character, and consistent, small actions accumulate over time to form patterns that either strengthen or weaken integrity. Whether it is responding to emails honestly, treating coworkers with respect consistently, fulfilling promises, or maintaining honesty in small financial matters, these repeated actions define our character far more than occasional grand gestures. Integrity is built not in spectacular moments, but in the ordinary, everyday decisions where no one is watching. Establishing routines that align with our values ensures that these small moments consistently reflect who we truly are. Another practical strategy is cultivating humility and gratitude. Humility reminds us that we are fallible and in need of continuous improvement, which keeps pride and self-righteousness, the roots of hypocrisy, at bay. Gratitude helps us focus on what we have rather than what we lack or what we think we deserve, reducing envy, resentment, and the temptation to act hypocritically to gain social approval or personal advantage. By integrating humility and gratitude into daily life, we maintain an honest perspective about ourselves and our relationships, nurturing authenticity rather than pretense. Finally, surrounding ourselves with examples of integrity can have a profound impact. We are influenced by those we admire and spend time with, so aligning ourselves with individuals, communities, and content that consistently model sincerity and moral courage strengthens our own commitment to avoiding hypocrisy. Inspiration is not enough on its own, but when paired with conscious effort, reflection, and accountability, it reinforces the behaviors and attitudes that make integrity second nature. In the end, avoiding hypocrisy is not a one-time achievement but a lifelong practice. It requires daily attention, deliberate effort, and the implementation of strategies that embed our principles into the fabric of our ordinary lives. By being mindful, establishing standards, reflecting regularly, seeking accountability, reinforcing ethical routines, cultivating humility, and drawing inspiration from those who exemplify integrity, we create a life where our words and actions are harmonized, where our intentions are clear, and where our character reflects the values we hold dear. These practical strategies are the bridge between understanding and living, between knowledge and transformation, and they are the tools that allow us to navigate the complexities of daily life without falling into hypocrisy. When we commit to these practices, integrity becomes not just an aspiration but a lived reality.